So my father, some of you may or may not know, did his undergraduate degree in speech and sound communication at Ohio University. And I remember my father telling me about some of the projects that they had to work on and for his program. One was working in a lab measuring frequency tolerance, how high of frequency people could hear. They'd put headphones on people. This is early days of headphones, no Dr. Dre's, no sound canceling, anything back then. And they'd just tell student volunteers, we're going to keep increasing the frequency, the sound level, but also the frequency of this sound. And when you can no longer hear it, we need you to put your hand up so we can measure, how high of frequency you're able to hear. Well, my dad, being my dad, back then said that he and his student colleagues got kind of bored doing this experiment at Ohio University. And so they thought they'd kind of make it a little more exciting. And so they told the student subjects coming in to have their ears tested that not only was the frequency in the headphones getting higher, but in the headphone there was a very razor-sharp needle that was coming out of the headphone, and it was entering the ear canal. And they said, now, as soon as you no longer hear that frequency, you have to put your hand up right away, because that means that needle is right at the edge of your eardrum. And given Dad was a college student at this time, looking to entertain himself, but I can imagine how stressed out those students would have been by the idea of a needle coming out of a headphone and coming down the ear canal. And although my dad never confessed to doing this, I like to imagine that maybe, just maybe, when they're putting their hands up, trying not to move too much because you don't want to offset that needle, that my dad and his buddies maybe had their backs turned and having a coffee and just to stress out their friends a little bit. Just want to give you an idea of the kind of home I grew up in. You have to admit, our ears can play tricks on us sometimes. And sometimes others, like my father and his student colleagues, can play tricks on our ears. We live in a day and age where many people in America are drowning in the rising sea of facts and alternative facts, of truth and truthiness, of information, misinformation, misguided information, misleading information. And no matter how high they build the sandbag wall, no matter how quickly they try and bail their buckets sloshing, many are being overwhelmed with this rising tide, this swirling vortex of information that's all around us, crying out to us, asking us to sort it all out, to process it, and what information needs to be applied, and what information can we just click delete and tune out. I don't know if you know, in the year 2010, Eric Schmidt, who was the past CEO of Google, was speaking at a conference. It was called Techonomy. He was speaking there in 2010 in California. And he said at that time that every 2 days, the world generates as much information as the world has generated since the dawn of time until the year 2003. In 2010, the world was generating as much information every 2 days as the world had generated since the dawn of time. That's a lot of information to deal with it. Most of it user-generated content, like sweet little kitty videos that people post to their Facebook or their YouTube channel. But I was thinking, that was the year 2010. That was 7 years ago. The amount of information that gets generated and shared even 7 years later has increased exponentially. You know how I know? Year 2010 was the year I got on Facebook. So, are you guys with me today? That's actually just trying to get you with. 2010 was the year I went on Facebook. I'm generating a lot of content. Man, if you have to explain it, it's just not funny. And even if you somehow manage to get all those external voices in check, every one of us in this room is confronted by a plethora of inner voices. The voices of doubt, of temptation, of lust, of greed. All day, every day, our ego is crying out, "Feed me, Seymour." We want to be God, right? We want to be in control. We want to manage the world. And the voices inside of our head are always speaking to us, always vying for our attention. I have to tell you, today I am going on less than 4 hours of sleep last night. Why? Not because I was restless about the sermon, which is usually the case for preachers on a Saturday night. No, last night I heard other voices speaking to me throughout the night. All week, Beth and I and others here at Old Stone have been fighting for the rights of the church. It's a First Amendment right to worship without being impacted so greatly by the American Ninja Warrior filming that NBC has been setting up on the square. We've been fighting for the rights of downtown residents not to be impacted by this great filming that's going to take place starting tomorrow night at 8 p.m. till 4 a.m. and the next night from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. And those of you who don't have a look of sympathy on your face right now don't know that Beth and I live on the other side of Public Square. And maybe what you don't know is that last night after we got home after a full day of this working with these wonderful couples here in our marriage program, about 7:30 at night we got in our comfy cozies and we're in the kitchen getting ready to make something for dinner and just sort of settle our minds, to settle our hearts, to settle our spirits for the night so that we could be ready for this moment today. And whoosh! NBC lit up one of the highest wattage lights you can ever imagine, pointed directly at our windows. Oh my gosh. In some ways it was actually a bit of a relief because you know we've all been living under cloud and rain for the last 4 days. I said, "Look, dear, it looks like noontime. It's so sunny and bright in here." So back on the phone I go with our city council person, with the Public Square programming, back and forth with texts and emails. My day ended at 11 o'clock, and I'm thinking, my goodness, this is not the way we do business in Cleveland. Normally when we have stuff on the square, we're so prepared, so ahead of the game. What has happened? Well, that's the question I took to bed with me last night. That's why I didn't sleep. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, all right, mayor's office is getting a letter on Monday. We're going to have to talk to these people, going to have to talk to these people. I couldn't turn it off. I could not turn it off. And everyone in this room, I suspect, has been in that place where you just can't turn it off. No, Loudville isn't just the upper deck of a Cavs game. It's the clamoring, cacophonous world in which we live. It's the clamoring, cacophonous inner world and outer world that infringes upon us regularly. Well, listen. Just listen for a moment. In the stillness, I want you to listen, not just with your ears. I want you to listen with your hearts. And I want you to listen with your spirits. Because underneath it all, there is a voice that is still speaking, a small, still voice that is as quiet as our own breathing. You know that voice, don't you? Sometimes that voice sounds like that stirring, that inner restlessness for shalom, that inner restlessness for this world to find healing and be at peace. Sometimes that voice speaks softly and yet as clearly as the gentle knowing of love that comes to married couples after decades and decades of marriage. It's the voice of the one who calls himself the Good Shepherd, Jesus Christ, stirring within each and every one of us. And we know the voice. We all know the voice. Whether you have a name for that voice or not, you've heard it since the time you were a small child, stirring within you. It's the voice of compassion. It's the voice of mercy and hospitality. It's the voice that has spoken to us throughout our younger years and into our adult years. And it's not a voice that screams at us. It's not a voice that yells at us. It's not angry or filled with judgment. It's a voice that sounds always much more like grace than law, much more like hope than discouragement. It sounds like love. Sometimes we hear that voice in the uproarious laughter we have with family or friends. Sometimes we hear the voice through the tears that we shed, the sorrowful tears. You know, the Canadian author Margaret Atwood, whose miniseries based on her book Handmaid's Tale I see is coming up on Hulu these days, once said that it's only through our tears that we see the world rightly. So why do you ask me why I'm crying? Sometimes God speaks in the laughter, sometimes through the tears. Jesus' voice cuts through the dim, it calms the clatter, it upsets the uproar, it reverses the racket, it tames the tumult. Jesus' voice is the voice that speaks to us not so much in a shout or a blast like some television talking head or a radio ad screaming for our attention. If you can't come Monday, come Tuesday. If you can't come Tuesday, come Wednesday. I'll give you 5 pounds of coffee if I can't beat your best deal. Now, that's not the voice of the inner good shepherd. Now, the voice we recognize is the one that speaks like a sighing breath, that says to each and every one of us, follow me. Follow me, and I will lead you beside still waters. I will lead you to green pastures. I have come that you might have life and that you might have it in abundance. Look, do you find it interesting that Jesus called himself the Good Shepherd? What a thing to call yourself when you stop for a moment and think about what a shepherd was. And I mean, Jesus doesn't call himself the good king, one with power, one with privilege. Jesus doesn't call himself the good president. He doesn't come to us with a campaign slogan, follow me and together we'll be better. He doesn't come to us with a campaign slogan like, follow me and we'll make the flock great again. Jesus knows the flock is already good because God created the flock. God formed the flock, and we are great when we are God's flock, following that voice. Jesus didn't call himself a good centurion. He didn't call himself a good cop. Jesus called himself the Good Shepherd, the humblest of all vocations, a lowly shepherd, someone who's powerless in the eyes of the world. Think about it. Shepherds don't own anything. They don't own the land upon which they herd the flock. They don't own the sheep which they shepherd. They don't own the gate. Jesus says the master opens the gate, someone else higher in power. He's just the good shepherd, a simple servant who works for the master. And yet, whose voice do the sheep follow? They follow the kings? Do they follow the centurions? No, they follow his voice, the voice of the shepherd. Why? Because the shepherd is the only one who will lay his life down for the sheep. The shepherd is the only one who has no agenda other than to protect the sheep and to lead them to those green pastures, to lead them to still waters. The only one who will lay his life down for his sheep. The Good Shepherd is the one whose voice we recognize. We hear it all the time. And even when the world outside or the world inside is vying for our attention, God finds a way to cut through it all and reach us. You know, it's amazing. Yesterday, I did my little morning session with the the marriage couples, the wedding couples, and I thought, okay, it was about 9:40, I think, when I finished. I thought, I'm going to run over to 200 Public Square. There's a great little coffee shop over there. I can finally, after this crazy week I've had, focus my thoughts, be still over a wonderful cup of coffee, get my blueberry scone, and I can sort of settle in, get focused, and start working on this sermon for today. Well, I walk out the side door of the Old Stone Church, and the first thing I hear is an emergency vehicle whizzing down Ontario Street, loud sirens whirring by me. And I thought, oh my gosh, all right, you live downtown, you work downtown, you're going to hear sirens. And then I'm walking around the square, and I'm hearing the construction noise. They're still building the set for American Ninja Warrior. And I thought, okay, it's one of the challenges of living downtown. And hey, trust me, we who worship downtown or live downtown around Public Square, we know all about Public Square construction. We can deal with that. But when I get into 200 Public Square, that's a 40-some story building, just kitty corner over here. And I get my coffee, and I get my scone, and I sit down, and I open up my little MacBook, and I start pecking away at the keys, going to work on this sermon. And all of a sudden, I kid you not, the fire alarm throughout the entire building starts going, and a voice comes over the radio, and it says, or over the intercom, and it says, "Attention, people, we will be testing the fire alarm all day today." Lord have mercy, I thought. Okay, be still, Mark. I'm chanting Psalm 46:10. Be still and know who is God. Just be in the zone, Mark. Just be there. You don't have to leave. They're going to make less noise, but you can go to that quiet inner place. Go to your happy place, Mark. Work on the sermon. So finally, I'm doing all the work of getting focused, and this young woman walks up to me as I'm sitting there at the table drinking my coffee. And she says, "Hey, aren't you the pastor of that church over there on Public Square?" I said, "Yeah, Old Stone Church." And she says, "Are you busy right now?" I looked over at my sad little sermon and I thought, no, I'm just working on my sermon, nothing important. I'm glad to talk with you. And she said, "Well, listen, Pastor, I want to share my story with you." She told me she was 27 years young, and she said, "I want to share my story with you. I want to tell you how God saved my life." And she began telling me how God had interrupted her through a time of illness and had literally saved her life. And because of that, how her life had turned a corner, and she had become a baptized Christian. And listen, I know we do a lot of talk in the church about how to reach millennials. Relax, God is reaching millennials. God interrupted her life, and as she said, He saved my life. And I just needed to tell somebody. I said, "I am so blessed that you shared that story with me. Thank you. I'm glad to know what God is doing in your life. But you blessed my life today." I said, here I was trying to listen for a word of God, that I could put it together in a nice, neatly packaged, articulated sermon for the people over at the Old Stone Church. And here God found a way. God found a way to reach old Giuliano through the voice of this one whose life had been saved by Jesus Christ. God spoke through the fire alarms. God spoke through the sirens, through the construction on the square. God broke through my inner voices. God got there. God spoke. Folks, I am not asking you, as your pastor, I am not asking you to plug your ears and sing the Star-Spangled Banner. I'm not asking you to quit listening, to tune out the world around you. In fact, to be a Christian, I believe, is to be in conversation with the world around us. But to be a Christian in conversation with the world, I believe we first must be in conversation with God. Somebody better shout amen. if we are going to be in conversation with the world, we need to be in conversation with the one who is leading us in the way of God. We need to tune in to the Good Shepherd, the one who speaks beneath all other voices, the one that is speaking to you now, the one that is stirring in your hearts and your minds each and every day, the one who will settle the other voices, the one who will bring clarity of mind and purpose to your life. I shared with some of you a while back that back in the 90s, I was elected as a delegate to the United Church of Canada's General Assembly, their annual meeting. It's a place where the church does its legal work. You know, it sets the law and it debates over the laws of the church. And it happens in a great meeting over about a 10-day period. I was really honored to go to this place. I was quite surprised how political church folks can be when it comes down to book of order issues and legal issues. And in the evenings, people would be kind of lobbying one another. There were whips who go around and try and work up the votes on particular issues. And in the mornings when we came into the court, there'd be 800 or 900 of us gathering for a day's worth of business. And the work's still going on. People are bubbling, doing politics. And hey, I talked to so-and-so. He's pretty sure we got votes on this over there. And we started every day with a little moment of worship. But what seems so fascinating to me is that the way the day began was not with the moderator banging a gavel, saying, "I'd like to call this court to order." It didn't begin with some person at the microphone going, "Attention, please, we'll now begin with worship." No, in the midst of this static, in the midst of the debate and the advocacy work going on and the lobbying, one person every morning simply walked up to the microphone and very quietly began to sing the words of Psalm 46:10. Be still, be still, be still and know that I am God, for I am exalted in the nations and on earth. Be still and know that I am God. And very slowly, one by one, people started to settle down. A calm kind of took over the room, and we remembered why we were really there. And all of a sudden, our politics and our debates and our conflicts didn't seem to matter quite as much. Oh, they were still important, but they weren't dividing us anymore. We were remembering who God was by simply hearing the voice of the Good Shepherd calling out to us through that one lone voice standing at the lectern behind the microphone. And as he sang, we all started to join in and sing together every morning. Be still, be still, be still and know that I am God. For I am exalted in the nations and on earth. Be still and know that I am God. Friends, we live in a day and age where so many people in our world are drowning in a rising sea of facts and alternative facts, of truth and truthiness, of information, of misguided information, of misleading information. And no matter how high they pile the sandbags against that rising current, no matter how quickly they bail their buckets sloshing, people are becoming overwhelmed. It seems to me now more than ever, perhaps, that we need to open our hearts, we need to open our spirits, and we need to listen. We need to listen for the voice of the Good Shepherd who is speaking to us even now. Praise be to God. Amen.